In the age of the internet, a rumor can spread across the globe in seconds. A conspiracy theory, a hoax, a half-truth. If it stirs enough emotion, it doesn't matter if it's real. It feels real, that we believe it. We run with it. And before long, it becomes folklore. But that isn't a new phenomenon. Long before Twitter or TikTok or YouTube rabbit holes, America already had a method for spreading myths. Called them newspapers. And in 1909, a small town in western Maryland used one to unleash a monster. This is not just a cryptid story. This is a case study in fear, media, and myth-making. Hey, I'm Binks, and this is actually my very first video. I'm an artist, and I also really like researching things, and creatures, and history, and the kind of folklore that just lives outside the spotlight. I wanted to start this channel because I love the way art and stories intersect, especially the spooky, muddly, mysterious ones. So today, we're starting with one of my favorite regions, the Appalachian Mountains, and this cryptid is kind of like a hoax, and maybe something worse. If you like folklore, fear, and the occasional unhinged government lie, go ahead and like, comment, and subscribe, because I've got plenty more monsters coming. It was described to be kind of like a dragon, a metal beak, and one glowing eye. It swooped down from the mountains and tugged at those society had already pushed into the margins. They called it the Snallygaster. This is not just a cryptid story. This is a case study in fear, media, and myth-making, and social control. Our story begins in the early 1700s when German immigrants, many of them Pennsylvania Dutch, settled in the hills and valleys of what we now call Western Maryland and Southern Pennsylvania. They brought with them their language, their farming traditions, and their ghosts. One of those was known as the Snallygeist, or quick spirit. It was known as a shadowy, supernatural figure, half ghost, half demon. It didn't chase you, it was already there, watching, passing through the trees like smoke. These stories weren't meant to scare children, but they were more so as warnings. More so they didn't wander far, they didn't go to the woods alone, and they respected the land and the spirits. And as their communities took root, settlers decorated their barns with hex signs. They were bright color geometrical patterns meant to repel evil. Some were for protection, and some were for luck, but all were rooted in the idea that the unseen world was always close. To them, the forests weren't empty. They were alive. By the late 1800s, the world was changing fast. Trains cut through the valleys, cities spread like moss, and fear of outsiders grew just as quickly. This is when the ghost becomes a monster. Schnellergeist slowly morphs into the Snallygaster, a mangled name passed from mouth to mouth, warped by dialect, fear, and imagination. The Snallygaster appears in political cartoons, sometimes used to mock corrupt politicians, and sometimes to representing immigrants or minority groups. Always something strange, something to blame. The monster becomes a flexible, convenient thing to just poke and prod at people. And people start to believe in it again, but this time as something much more physical and violent. The idea was no longer, what if something is watching us? Now it's, what if something's coming for us? That shift from spiritual omen to flesh and blood terror sets the stage for what's about to come next. In February 12, 1909, the Valley Register, a paper of Middletown, Pennsylvania, publishes a dramatic headline: "The colored people are in great danger." The article describes a winged beast terrorizing the area. It is said to have a single eye, a long iron beak, claws like meat hooks. It flies low over the trees, lets out a scream like a train whistle, and then steals someone. But look closer, something's off. Every detail's a little too dramatic. The descriptions read more like Pulp Fiction than journalism. And more importantly, every reported victim is black. It wasn't random, definitely intentional. In 1909, white communities in Maryland were enforcing segregation, suppressing black votes and spreading racial fear. The Snallygaster, this wild, invented threat, fit neatly into that agenda. it gave white readers something to be afraid of. And it painted Black communities as endangered, vulnerable, or under siege. In other words, it reinforced the narrative that white people were the protectors and Black people were the ones in danger and needed control. The creature was fake, but the consequences weren't. From there, the hoax spirals. A new article claims that Snallygaster laid an egg the size of a beer barrel. Another says Theodore Roosevelt was planning a special hunting trip to the mountains. Some even claim the Smithsonian Institution was involved, sending teams to investigate. And then there's Umobidland, a fictional region invented the creature's habitat, and punctal shells said to be scattered across the hillsides. Fake evidence, fake geography, fake history. None of that's real. I tried to look, trust me. All designed to sell more papers. None of it was real, but readers did not care. In fact, the more outrageous the stories got, the more people wanted to believe. Because fear, mixed with spectacle, is a powerful drug. And in 1909, that drug was being injected straight into the public imagination. Then, 1932 rolls around. A man shoots something strange out of the sky near Hagerstown, and he calls for help. A 10-year-old boy comes to his aid and drags the corpse into the city square. The local paper runs another Snallygaster story. It's back. But the truth was simpler. It was just a great owl, likely blown south from Canada by a storm. And when experts examined it, it was that. No one caught a monster. They just proven how desperate people were to believe in one. Ugh, the myth didn't die. It had already become a permanent part of local legend. All across Pennsylvania and Maryland, you can still find barns and hex signs. Some are bright and fresh, others faded and rusting. They weren't just decorative. They were spiritual armor, painted to protect families, homes, and animals, and in years later, to ward off monsters. While many of these signs had nothing to do with the Snallygaster, over time, the two kind of became tangled. The sign became a symbol of not just safety, but of resistance against whatever you feared in the woods or your neighbor. They're a reminder that the belief systems are built in layers, and once a story sinks in, it can live on. Today, the Snallygaster hasn't disappeared, it's evolved. In Fallout 76, the creature is reborn in a twisted, irradiated form. No longer just folklore, the Snallygaster becomes something biologically manufactured. According to in-game lore, these beasts were once humans, mutated by experiments at the government's West Tech facility. They lost their bones, minds, and their humanity. Now they stalk the Appalachian wasteland on two legs, eyeless and grotesque. That's not the only place the legend shows up. In the Harry Potter universe, specifically the Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, the Snallygaster is reimagined as a magical American creature. This version is still reptilian, bird-like, and fearsome, but it's a more whimsical than horrifying. It lives in the wilds of North America, protected and studied and not hunted. It's a sanitized version, stripped of its racist history and newspaper-born panic. A myth cleaned up for magical textbooks. And that's the thing about legends. They don't die. They kind of shapeshift. In both versions, the mutated wasteland creature and the magical beast, the Snallygaster, becomes a character you can fight or study. But these modern interpretations miss the deeper weight from the original myth. The fear it was meant to spread in 1909 has faded, the racial panic fueled with headlines is all but forgotten, and the reasons the myth was created remain unexamined. But maybe that's the point. Monsters are easier to handle when contained, given stats, magical traits, or reduced to trivia. But the original Snallygaster wasn't designed to be admired, it was built to intimidate. So as it's rebranded and reborn, we have to ask, are we claiming the myth, or are we just burying the truth? It started as fear in print, a made-up monster to keep people afraid and quiet. Now, it's an Appalachian beer event, and you can even slay it in Fallout 76. The new Snallygaster became a form of pop culture. But the original Snallygaster wasn't meant to entertain, it was meant to intimidate. Not all monsters lurk in the woods. Some are built in headlines, crafted to creep inside your mind. We didn't just create the Snallygaster, we gave it what every monster needs. A story, a little fear, and an audience willing to run it.